Welcome everybody to episode 4 of R&R D&D. Stands for people new watching, Raziel and Rhomagus, Deduce and Discuss. This is episode 4, the meta. If you're not familiar with our other episodes, they are on my YouTube channel and Rhomagus' YouTube channel, as you can see in the links on my stream here. Today, we have a special guest that I would like to introduce, Josh Strife Hayes. Go ahead and introduce yourself, more about yourself, Josh.
Thank you, Raziel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining in. My name is Josh Strife Hayes. I've been playing MMORPGs and making YouTube videos about MMORPGs for about 10-15 years now. Tried all the major ones, spent a lot of time on Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy XIV, RuneScape, Neverwinter, Elder Scrolls Online, Terra, and because I've had so many experiences with them, I've had a lot of time, a lot of chances to talk to people who've played them, so I'm hoping today we can get really in-depth and analyze what we like about them.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks. So just to give everyone else a heads up, how I found Josh and decided to ask him to guest on the show was, as you know from my channel, it's all about MMOs. Like 95% is MMOs and the other 5% is just really edgy bullshit. But I found Josh's YouTube channel and just kind of binge watched him over a period of 2 or 3 days. And I really enjoyed it and decided, hey, man, this guy shares a lot of my opinions, talks about a lot of the stuff that Rhomagus and I have had discussions about. So we should get him on the show. And he gracefully accepted my invitation. So it's been, thanks for coming on the show.
More than welcome, mate. More than welcome.
All right. So today's discussion topic is the meta, which, for a lack of better phrase, it exists and there's nothing we can do about it too much right now at this point. It didn't always exist in such a blatant way, in my opinion. Me personally, I've been playing MMOs since 1999. My first MMO was Asheron's Call. I'm an old bastard. I'm a lot older than I look. And I love the game. I love MMOs. It's what made me fall in love with it before the first MUDs that I would play with my cousins. The text-based, for all you millennials out there, text-based MMOs, you know. But I wanted the first part of this topic I want to hit on is what effect does the meta have? And actually, before we even get there, what is the meta? Josh, do you want to discuss what the meta is in your opinion?
Sure. Feel free to jump in and stop me if I go too far into this, because you and me are just as passionate about this.
Right.
The meta means two things depending on exactly what you're talking about. One of them is knowledge of itself or outside of itself. To give you an example of this, imagine if you were watching a film and a character turned and spoke directly to you in the audience, directly to the camera. They shouldn't be able to do that. That is meta. That is going outside of itself. To link it to MMORPGs, if you were going to go and kill a boss, if you were going to find an item and you researched what the boss would do, you researched what the item would do before you got it, you are suddenly gaining knowledge outside of the game about the game. You could refer to that as meta. The second meaning of meta, and the one we're probably going to focus on today, is the most efficient way to achieve a goal. So if I want to gain some woodcutting experience in RuneScape, if I want to get some herb lore in World of Warcraft, what is the single most efficient thing I could do to maximize the numbers, to push those numbers, right, those experience things as high as they could be? So it's either knowledge outside of itself, or it's the single most efficient way to achieve a goal.
Absolutely. God damn it, Rhomagus. Okay.
Sorry,
what do you have to say about that, Rhomagus? What do you want to add to that?
Well, I'd say there's a third part too. The meta. The meta also has to do with the rules outside of the game that you still kind of sort of play by. So the unspoken rules. So like, for example, in poker, the whole term having a poker face. So having a poker face has nothing to do with the rules of poker, but has everything to do with betting strategy and how to play the game of poker.
Right.
So that becomes, having having a stern face or hiding your eyes becomes a strategy in and of itself that wasn't originally intended by the game developers.
I would say I agree with both you guys' definition. What blows my mind about it is every game that's ever existed. I mean, even Pong on the Atari 2600 had a meta, and we just didn't know about it for so long. You didn't focus on that because the whole point of the game was to enjoy yourself, was to have fun. And somehow, and I hope to figure this out during this discussion, somehow we lost that in translation, where it's the entire metagame has become the game, and everything else that's fun is not important to most people. So back to the original question before we went into our definitions of what the meta actually is. What effect do you think the meta has in the MMORPG market space? So the point A we have here on our list is the economy. MMOs have economies exactly like real life. And, a lot of MMOs, the economy is doing very well compared to what our economy is right now. Thanks, Corona. But I want to get your guys' opinion on what effect the meta has, whether it can be a good effect or a bad effect on the game's economy as a whole. And Josh, let's start with you again.
Okay. I'm going to use old school RuneScape for a lot of my examples, just because it's the game that I've got the most experience with, although I believe it applies to all MMORPGs. If you are able to buy items that you need in the game, if they're not bind on equip, if they're not bind on pickup, if you're able to just buy things as and when you need them, then the best way, the most efficient way to do it is actually to find the way to make the most money, the meta money-making method, and just do that. If I could cut logs for an hour and gain so many logs, or I could kill enemies for an hour, gain more money, and then buy more logs than I would have been able to make in that hour, the process of actually cutting the logs becomes completely pointless. It becomes unimportant. It becomes inefficient to do the thing to get the thing that it creates. You might as well do the meta money-making method and do the other thing. So the economy in relation to the meta always gets skewed toward whatever makes the most money at the time. But ironically then, the things that you're trying to buy suddenly become rare because no one's collecting them. No one's actually going to get them. Everyone's doing what the meta is, and so the supply and demand do this lovely dance between the most efficient money-making method and the thing you actually want to buy. I am making a lot of money in old school RuneScape by farming something that no one else farms. And when people say to me, it's pointless, why are you farming that? It's not the meta. And I'll say, because I'm the only person selling them. Because I'm the only person with the supply of this. So now the supply and demand is my thing. The economy,
it's your meta now.
Yeah, it jumps around. The economy says this is the best way to make money, and when you have money, what do you buy with it? But what if it's something that isn't tradable, that you can't buy? You've got to go and do that. The economy will inflate and deflate based on the best way to make money, but the best way to make money will change based on what the meta needs at the time. It's a fantastically interesting concept.
Right. And to be honest, I think before I go to your point, Rhomagus, the entire process of, that's what the meta is, what builds the economy in these games. If we didn't have a meta, which is, maybe a good thing, there would be no economy. If there was nothing so valuable to get that takes time, just no one would get it, no one would play the game. There'd be no reason to do anything. So a meta has to exist in that sense, where it drives the economy. Because I remember back in vanilla World of Warcraft, back when I played that, and throughout when Burning Crusade came out and people started doing that, all the content there, to make money, like you said, I would go back to the old zones in vanilla WoW,
yep.
And grab all that shit, and then I could turn around and sell it because no one else had that. No one else was leveling up a new character. They were all getting all their characters up to 70. And all of a sudden, something that was worthless a month before the expansion came out, no one wanted, people were, paying me truckloads of money for. So, Rhomagus, what did you have to add about good and bad on the economy for the meta?
Yeah, I was going to say these are sort of mechanics that weren't initially a part of the main part of the game, right? So the economy is entirely dependent on what people want at the time, just like what Josh was saying, the dance between supply and demand. And sometimes that supply doesn't really have a direct connection with, the terms of the game. So like, for example, a lot of crafters in Final Fantasy XIV, for example, they make most of their money off of crafting items, right? So instead of making swords and shields for the hero characters, they make clothing and
food
and tools for other crafters, and it's those crafters that purchase that are the usually the main source of money in regards to the economy, because the game itself has found other ways to supply people who just want to be heroes. They could just get in-game gear by collecting, tomes or whatnot. They don't actually have to really technically take part in the economy, but those that choose to take part in the economy actually focus more on the meta game, which is the economy pretty much.
Right. They're not interested in getting the items. They just will pay the money so they can get to the meta class.
Correct. Yeah.
To make their meta class function the best.
Also, what Josh was alluding to as well is finding a niche, right? So Josh would find a niche on something that wasn't a part of the meta in terms of the economy, and a lot of crafters will do that. Crafting, you could say, is that in and of itself. It's a niche activity in the game, a mini game, so to speak, that people are really interested in, and they find ways to profit off of it.
Yeah. I mean, something that springs to my mind, I remember back in Asheron's Call, because in that game, I don't know if you ever played Asheron's Call, Josh, but
I've had a very limited experience with that.
Okay.
I know exactly what you're mentioning, and I can picture it in my head, but you have way more knowledge than I do.
Right. Okay, so in Asheron's Call, death was very severe. If you died, your corpse would drop, and your most valuable items on your body would drop on your corpse. So you'd have to do a corpse run, kind of like EverQuest did the same thing. Yeah. But you'd have to go back, and and if you were in a dangerous area, like you wandered somewhere you shouldn't for your level, you'd have to go to town and get some people to help you. Well, at some point in the game, they released a suit of armor that was, stat-wise, wasn't the best in the game, but it was pretty strong. But its strongest feature was that it could not drop on your body on death. And it was called the Greater Shadow Armor. And to get the Greater Shadow Armor, you had to hunt these super rare crystal creatures and shadow creatures, and then they had a super small chance of dropping these shards. And you had to collect 24 of each, if I remember right. It was brutal. Yeah. I'm not kidding when I say I was selling suits of that shit on eBay for $50 a pop, because how I figured it out was there was this dungeon, because in that game, I mean, this was kind of before data mining and any of that. So there were some dungeons in the game that probably less than 5% of the player base even knew existed. And a friend and I stumbled across a low-level dungeon, like level 30. It was really low. And you had to be 30 or below to go in. If you were higher, you couldn't go in. So we had lower-level characters we went in there with. And this dungeon was spawning tons of these shard creatures. Tons of them. And so we just left our low-level characters in there and just farmed all these crystals for days and days and days and days that were super rare, and were able to make this armor over and over and over again. And the entire economy for that game for the better part of 3-4 years was shadow armor. The shards that made the shadow armor, like money, the currency, were called pyrals in that game. They didn't matter anymore. Nobody cared. Everybody wanted the shards and the armor because they didn't want to lose their armor when they died. And so, like you guys were saying, the economy was completely shifted. The designers of the game had money. The designers of the game put in cash that they wanted to use as currency. But very quickly, the meta shifted the economy itself to be these shards. That's what everybody wanted. They would use it as currency. So if anyone was trading anything, they would always translate it to, hey, I'm looking to get rid of this item, looking to sell this item for X amount of shards. Everyone wanted shards. So I think you guys are both right. I mean, the economy exists because of the meta. And I don't think there's any way a developer can force what they want their currency to be
really
in their
interesting
game.
Point that you picked on there is when any MMORPG gains an item, a spell, a class, an ability, a suit of armor that will fundamentally shift how the game is played, the meta moves around it. That thing almost becomes the center of the universe for a while, and the whole game suddenly starts to revolve around that instead. I think developers sometimes don't understand either how powerful an item is going to be, or how powerful a combination of things will be, and just how much effect it has on the player base. As soon as you release anything into a game that can potentially become overpowered, or be impossible to lose, or break a mechanic like the death runs, you're going to change how the very game itself plays, and you have to fix that.
Yeah. I mean, that's... And the thing is a lot of time, I think developers don't look at it as something they have to fix, which is a problem. I think they get a great idea. They're like, oh, wouldn't this be great if we gave players this thing? Because that would solve this problem. But a lot of developers, especially these days, don't have the foresight to say, well, yeah, it may fix that thing that players don't really like, but it completely fucks everything else in the game.
Let's tie this back to the point that we made earlier when we said that once there becomes a meta way of making money or making cash, it's pointless to do anything else. You said that you were farming those shards, the drops.
Mm-hmm.
Because you knew how to do that, if you didn't do that, you would be playing inefficiently. You'd completely be aware that you could be playing more efficiently and not. So the game, when that became an option to you, the rest of the game effectively became pointless. And the game became, get these shards. Because no matter what you do in the game, it wouldn't be as efficient as get the shards. So Acheron's call at that moment to anyone who had that knowledge becomes get the shards. Everything else is completely irrelevant. And when MMORPGs do this, when they say, hey, you've got the ability to do this, which is completely broken and overpowered, everyone will do that, and it makes all the other content in the game effectively pointless. No one's going to do the other content when there's no reason to do the other content compared to this.
Right. No, absolutely. Rhomagus, what do you think of that?
I was going to say, well, that entirely depends on what your interest in the content is, right? So, for example, it is not required to level a crafting class to beat the game. It's not required to level a crafting class to even play the game. There are plenty of people in Final Fantasy XIV that don't play crafting classes. But so crafting isn't the main draw of the game. You actually can't complete the main story quest as a crafting class. Back in 14.1.0 you could, but in the new version, in 2.0 and onwards, you have to be some kind of battle class in order to finish the main story quest. So those things still exist, but those you could argue that at one point they're completely meta in that they're focusing only on the economy. But on the other end, when it comes to the efficiency of beating the game, any players that choose to go to the gathering or crafting route of things, they're playing things that aren't a part of the game, that you could argue that's not a part of being efficient at the main point of the game.
Right.
So it all depends. It's about finding your own niche. So
sure.
The meta can be good in that it's this sort of, it's the dance that Josh referred to earlier between supply and demand and the economy. But it can also be bad when people, when they start number crunching and stop seeing the game for what it provides and only for how to be as efficient as possible in the game.
Right, which is actually our next point, which is I think economically the meta can have some benefits. It can really help shape what's valuable and what's not in a game. But now we get to as time moved on, I remember thinking back to when I played Vanilla WoW and back 2004, 2005, and even in BC, things like DPS meters weren't that huge. I mean, you had add-ons to help you get good, stuff like that. But for the most part, you had to do a lot of that on your own. You had to figure out, like it was more about the fun. Like, is this class I'm playing fun to play? Do I like its rotation? You weren't as concerned with, well, am I doing the rotation 100% efficiently? Because otherwise, if I'm not, my guild's going to kick my ass out of here. If I keep showing up to these events and not playing MLG level play, like I've got to be on my game. And this is where I think it starts to get toxic. This is where I think where the meta drives away a lot of the fun, because like you were saying, Josh, you in your own head, you can't unsee it. It's the red pill of gaming. Once you see the meta, you can't unsee it, to where you go, okay, I know what the best way to play is, like efficiency wise. I know when I'm not being my absolute best for whatever class I play or whatever zone I'm in or whatever item I'm farming. And it's really hard, personally, which I hate, when I'm like, dude, I just want to do what I enjoy. And to my credit, and Rhomagus can attest to this, I've never played a class in Final Fantasy XIV, and in fact in any game, because it was meta. I never went, well, Dark Knight sucks now. They nerfed XYZ. Guess I'm going to be a warrior now. I'd be like, yeah, warriors are way better than Dark Knight. But fuck that, I'm an edgelord. I'm playing a Dark Knight. Like, so anti-meta, even in a way. But what do you think the negative effect can be, Josh, on people focusing so hard on what is meta and what is the most efficient when it comes to terms of end game PvE and PvP content?
Sure. Rhomagus raised a really interesting point just there as well. He said that doing the meta crafting doesn't allow you to progress the story, and that's totally related to what do you enjoy? How do you have fun? And can you have fun wrong, if that makes sense? So I'd like to, if we can definitely come back to that in the future. We'll talk to you now, but that was a really interesting point from Rhomagus.
Sure.
Let's take it out of the game at all. Do you guys go on Reddit much? I use Reddit all the time.
Yes.
Reddit is a fantastic website.
I waste far too much time on Reddit.
Obviously, you've got to waste far too much time on Reddit. How many posts do you see, what MMO should I play? Before people have even started a game, what game do I play? Well, why are they asking that question? They want to know, is the game active? Is it going to survive? Is this going to be worth my time? They're asking for what the meta game is, not even the way that you play that game. They're saying, what is worth my time?
I don't mean to totally interrupt you, but you brought that up. There's actually someone in my Discord he's been like a Twitch follower of mine for months and months.
Yeah.
And I eventually had to make a channel for him in my Discord called Help Him Form an Opinion.
Yeah.
Because he would nonstop.
Yeah. Because
he was so concerned.
The game, and people want to know, and people say, is this worth my time? Is that worth my time? They want to know that what they're doing is efficient in terms of time invested before the game even starts. And then they finally choose a game. It's going to be one of the big five. It's going to be Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, or Old School RuneScape. They are the big five that will survive, and people will keep playing those. And then you go into the actual Discord of that, or you go into the Reddit of that. What is the best class? What is the best DPS? I want to be the best tank. I want to be the best healer. What is it? People don't want to waste their time playing any class that's inefficient. So the meta wrecks your experience of the game. You then brought up DPS meters. All MMORPGs are just different reskins of mathematical numbers happening behind the scenes. Your health, the enemy's health, your damage, the enemy's defense. It's just numbers. All games are just numbers, and they look different. And then you put a DPS meter there, and then you put a threat meter there, and then you put a dodge meter there, and then you put the food there and how much it heals. Then you put where your team are, and your screen just gets completely flooded with numbers. It doesn't even matter what the game looks like anymore. It just gets flooded with numbers, and you end up being a mathematician. How do I make that number higher and that number lower? The meta game takes the game away and replaces it with a formula. How do I make the end result of this formula what I want it to be? How do I make the numbers where they need to get to? So the more meta you try and get, what game do I play? Which class do I play? How do I play it? What do I equip? The more you take away from what the game even is. The more the graphics, don't even matter to you. The graphics don't matter. The gameplay doesn't matter. The classes don't matter. All you need to know is what is going to make that number higher. And that's really sad. That's like reading a book but not even caring about the adventure, just caring what the exact situation is at the end of the book. Picking up a book, flicking to the end and saying, oh, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, done. I've read the book. No, you haven't. You haven't experienced the journey, the enjoyment, the bit within the middle of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rhomagus, you were going to say something? Chime in there. I know we had a podcast about escapism and the journey. So Rhomagus, this is where your time to shine, buddy. Don't be shit.
Yeah. That's the thing is you can do that. You can go into a game and just look at the numbers, go all Neo, and the entire game just turns into a grid of green zeros and ones raining down, and people dig that. I mean, I would argue that that's what speedrunning is. Speedrunning is entirely meta.
That's what Diablo 3 is.
And you're not, once you're speedrunning, you're not even really playing the game anymore. You're playing the game against other people that aren't even there, right? Or you're playing the game against yourself, right? You're trying to get a personal best or whatever. I'm not even really downing that, right? Because I actually like watching speedrunners, specifically in really difficult games where like you could see what they're doing and how they cheese mechanics and stuff, So like that is an enjoyment in and of itself. But I think one of the bigger issues, and again, it's something very particular to MMOs, and I would say in today's day and age, in our internet connected world, is, back in the RPGs of yesteryear, you didn't really have direct access to the internet and a bunch of people to be able to share their opinion about whatever game that they're playing at the time. So all of these metas were part of very specific niches that didn't really have a voice in and of themselves. A lot of people thought that they were good at a game until they went to a tournament or something like that. I mean, even tournaments were rare back then. And then it was only then they were able to figure out, wow, there's all of these things that people are doing that I'm not doing that makes them so much better than I am at the game or whatever. Right. Well, in terms of MMOs, because they give you such like immediate developer consumer response, is that the game, and because of the constant update structure of MMOs, the game ends up adapting to the player base and how they play the game. So it doesn't matter what the developer had in mind. And what ends up happening, and even they develop for the mean of players. They don't develop for the top tier players or the bottom rung of players. They try to capture all of that, by having certain things sequestered in certain areas. But what ends up happening is these top tier players get noticed by these lower tier players, and it's the vast majority in the middle that ends up copying what the top tier can do. And then not only that, but then they use that behavior as sort of a stick to keep out filthy casuals, or the folks that aren't into, following the top tier play style, even though they might be following their own play style.
I want to touch, Rhomagus, on what you said there with people copying people. I think that's where a lot of the bullshit gets pushed into the games. And what I mean by that is I think back to the older games I played, and, me, myself, being in a game and being a complete noob to the game. And I would be in a town or something, and I would see somebody run past me that was in like this amazing armor, this amazing gear. And so, I'd whisper him, "Hey, how did you get that? That's awesome. That's badass. I want to look like that." And he'd be like, "Oh, you got to do this and this and this." And that's as far as back then, being a green behind the ears and all that, wet behind the ears, right? That's the saying. But I'd go in there and that's what I chase. So I'd be like, I want to get that good. And what the meta has evolved now is you'll see new players in Final Fantasy 14, and they'll come up and they'll get trashed. They'll get torn apart by people because A, you're playing a job that sucks. Go play a different class. B, your numbers aren't good enough. C, your melds aren't good enough. They're wrong, and it goes beyond it just being a joke or trying to encourage a player to be better or pull their weight in certain content. It goes to where people start telling other people that they're pieces of shit that should uninstall because they chose to pick. They picked a class that happened to be what they thought looked the coolest or the most fun. And it's not the meta job. It's not the meta class. But the thing I love about that too, though, is it can go back against these kinds of people. A perfect example is when the first Ultimate Raid was released in Final Fantasy XIV, someone had figured out that it was mathematically impossible for the Dark Knight tank to beat that content. You just can't do it. If a Dark Knight is one of your 2 tanks, you can't do this content. The first group to beat it had a Dark Knight,
right,
and pretty much told the guy to eat shit, and he was like,
yeah, I remember that. And specifically what I thought was really weird because of that was that's what usually ends up happening with these top tier groups, right? Is that they actually know the game so well, they could play it on any class because they're so good at the game. But these lower tier people think, sometimes they go beyond what these higher tier people are doing, and they say, don't do that because you're not good enough or whatever. Right. And that was the prescription for the rest of the players of the game,
right.
was that
don't do that
you
because
can't play
it
a
sucks.
Dark Knight. Right.
Right.
But
don't do that because
obviously
it sucks.
the world first clear was done with the Dark Knight. So why is this shit even getting part of the meta in the first place?
Well, you see it everywhere.
Proven wrong on the outset.
Right.
And I think the biggest issue is so we were talking about the meta. There's 2 aspects to it. There's the beautiful dance that Josh referred to in the economy of supply and demand, but then there's the horrible groupthink that it ends up fostering.
So I was going to say, people are sheep, man. There's a whole bunch of people that'll set up parties for endgame content in many MMOs, listing we want this, which is the meta configuration, the meta class group, dynamic. But then you get in a group with them and they're terrible. They're fucking terrible. Yeah. And you're like, dude, just because you are playing the mathematically and statistically best combination in the game isn't going to suddenly give you skill.
That's known as all the gear, no idea. That's what.
Yeah. Right, exactly. All the gear, no idea. I love that. I love that phrase. I'll just steal that from you.
2 points in quickly that Rhomagus really raised.
Yeah.
You mentioned having all the info available to us, DPS meters, stuff like that, the best gear. Later on, can we talk about how maybe the fact that we've got access to that information and we didn't have access to it years before has changed how we've played the game?
Oh, absolutely.
I'll be playing old school RuneScape and someone will pop into my stream and say, why are you doing that? Why are you making nature runes instead of lava runes? Why are you attacking an enemy this way when you could be attacking it that way? Their very first question to me is always, why aren't you playing the meta? Why are you doing something else? It's just a very sad situation that people are in this groupthink that you said, where if someone is not playing the game the way that it's been solved, they're playing it wrong, or they're playing it questionably.
Well, Classic WoW is a perfect example of this.
Yeah.
That's what's going on in Classic WoW right now. I've seen a lot of content people put out where they this was vanilla WoW, this is Classic WoW. They're the same game when you're talking in terms of the code, the patch. Mm-hmm. But Classic WoW, it's I remember on the server I was on, a vanilla WoW, one person in the entire server had a Blessed Blade of the Windseeker, Thunder Fury. And now everyone has it. Yeah, did someone say that? But everyone has it. Everyone has the Hand of Ragnaros, right? Whatever it is. Everyone has everything, and people are bored.
And it's strange when they're asking for a group, and the items that you're required to have to get into the dungeon are the items that are dropped in the dungeon.
Oh yeah, that was.
Why don't you have these items? I'm like, because I haven't done the dungeon yet. Why do you want me to have the items from the dungeon to do the dungeon?
And I started to see that in Wrath of the Lich King when the first add-on gear score was ever made, because before then you couldn't see the item level of a piece of gear. Yeah. So then this add-on would show you it, and then people would be like, "Hey, doing Ice Crown Citadel, 10-man, normal, must have gear score of, 350. And it's like, dude, the dungeon drops 340, bro.
Yeah. How am I meant to get that without doing this?
Why would I be doing this?
Is you have people that just want to they want to face roll the content. They don't want to actually play the content. I see that right now in today's Party Finder in Final Fantasy 14. I'm currently on was it E5S, and I'm trying to get it cleared, and I see a bunch of people, they're forming parties that are 10, 20 levels above the minimum.
Must have beat E8S.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they're requiring the item level to be able to play the hardest content to get through the not as hard content. Yeah. It's like, and I think the problem with the meta too, especially in terms of just MMOs or video games, is a lot of people are only focusing on the mathematics in the game. Mm-hmm. Even though they're playing the meta, they're not actually thinking about the mathematics in their real life, right? Because they're so lost in escaping into the game, and they're requiring these very specific party setups. They're spending more time in the Party Finder waiting for that specific job to show up, right? So, and the whole reason they were doing it is because they want to get it done fast, right? But
and what's sad about that?
Opening up the Party Finder to people where you could fill the party quickly, adjust accordingly, and then actually get more kills in a shorter amount of time. They're always more focused on kill time rather than kill time over real time.
Right. And what's so sad about that? The people that you're talking about, Rhomagus, you can find in any MMO the top streamers for that MMO doing like the hardest content in the game as fast as most efficiently as possible. And you can just look in their eyes and they're dead inside. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell that they're loathing what they're doing. They're like, they're not enjoying themselves. They're just like, well, I'm about to clear the hardest raid boss in the game for the 40th fucking time tonight.
Yeah. Stop playing Neverwinter.
All right. Yeah. And you can just see they're like, I'm not enjoying, but it's the most efficient thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're going to keep doing. And it's
that's a meta on a meta, right?
Right.
So you got people that are playing a game, but they only play the game in a certain way in order to gain viewers, and viewers only watch a certain type of content, and they don't watch the actual person. They watch the actual person playing the game that they want. But if any one of those combinations of things falls out of place, then the streamer themselves is shot, or and they become addicted to. Well, and it goes the same with YouTube views as well. It doesn't. It doesn't just have to be streaming, but people start making content, and they start
they stop doing what they want to do for content
rather than their own personal interests.
Right. And I agree. And I'm sure you guys both of you know this. Josh, you probably know it really well, is if you ever take a break from Twitch streaming and you come back, you start from square one. Yep. Right. Like it doesn't. Right. Unless I have a low cut shirt and double D breasts, I ain't getting people back that fast. So what I would do is like a perfect example. A couple months ago, I took a break because I'm small on YouTube. I'm small on Twitch. I think my biggest Twitch stream I ever had like 50 or 60 people watching. But I would be doing the hard end game content, and it burned me out. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a break for like 3-4 months. And I slowly have started coming back right before we started doing the show about 2-3 weeks ago. And man, I'm lucky to hit 10, and I don't care. It's like, that's not why I did it. But you got to take care of your own man, yourself. And in the same way, the meta can burn you out. The meta can, if your entire mindset is focused around what's most efficient, what gets things done the fastest, what's the best class to play, you find yourself, it becomes a job.
Yeah, it does.
Essentially. And it's not something you're doing for fun.
One of the really big problems with MMORPG metas is, to link it to another game that I play Magic the Gathering a lot. I don't know if you guys have played Pokemon, Magic the Gathering.
I played Magic quite a bit, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. I'm a huge Magic the Gathering fan, and what'll happen is, this actually links to earlier when we said the top tier players will influence the middle players. You can go on MTG Goldfish, you can go on any Magic website, and you can see the decks that are winning tournaments. And all you need to do is net deck. You build the same deck as the winner of the previous tournament. You go to a new tournament, you're going to win. That's the theory. You've got the same deck. But I was playing in tournaments a couple of years ago now, actually. And it was a card called Delver of Secrets. If you play Magic the Gathering, you'll know what the Delver of Secrets cards does. And everyone was building around this card because it was so bloody good. So I built a deck that did nothing but kill Delver. It was terrible at everything else. If I faced any other deck, I would lose instantly.
Ultimate troll, man.
All it did was kill Delver of Secrets. But the problem was, in the tournament, all I faced was Delver of Secret decks. So every single game, I was just steamrolling all the time. So I was killing that. I could see the meta and fight against it. And then next tournament, Delver was out. Something else was in. This was a beautiful example of the meta changing to the reaction of the previous meta. Someone won with this, so you brought this. Someone won. It's like rock, paper, scissors.
Right.
You win with this, you take this. You win with this, you take this. The big problem with MMORPGs is that as soon as the meta is effectively solved, it can't change until there's an update. It can't change until there's more content. When you work out the best way to kill a boss, that will pretty much remain the best way to kill a boss. And you said we get burnt out. We do the final raid for the 40th time in a day. And all the streamers are there going, I want something new. I want something new. I need new content. And as soon as the new content is dropped, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to slowly go through this. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to smell the rose. I'm going to take my time. Their first thing is, what is the new meta? That's everyone's first question.
Absolutely.
In relation to it. We were bored. Hey, look, new content. What's the quickest way to get bored again? That's what tends to happen with the new meta.
Exactly. And I think your example of Magic the Gathering is perfect because, I mean, how it shifted the next tournament. Because, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, the people who run the tournament can at any time go, hey, this card is no longer
they ban cards when legal. They become too prevalent. They've done that recently with Hogarth. Right.
So they can make something illegal. Bam, changes the dynamics. And with an MMO, like you were saying, man, once a meta is there, a lot of times a meta in an MMO is there for an entire run of an expansion. We're talking like 2 years. Yeah. It'll be pretty consistent until, the developers will go, okay, well, shit, these 3 classes were steamrolling everybody else for 2 years. How can we fix that for this expansion? And then they'll do these drastic overhauls where you pretty much have to relearn those classes. Both the ones that were drastically underperforming and the ones that were drastically overperforming get leveled out. But then someone goes, okay, so they nerfed this class. That class got buffed. This class got overbuffed.
Yeah.
Let's go there. And then everyone does that. It hasn't
been fixed. It's just
shifted. It's just changed. Yeah, just shifted.
Well, and that happens a lot too. What ends up happening is that the developers get tired of playing that dance. And so then they end up just making all the classes the same.
WoW is a good, perfect example. Retail WoW is a perfect example of what you just said.
Yeah. So. And I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it in 14 as well. I know back in original 1.0, you could level any class and apply any ability that you learned as any class onto any other class.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was their original mindset from the get-go, was that people who spent the time to level all of the classes had access to all of these abilities, and there was no set thing you could do. I remember I was tanking in full armor as a archer. in this Spochet is what it was called. Now
they tried to carry that over to 2.0 as well. And then that got abandoned pretty quick.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that, because that's the issue, is a lot of people, you do have to end up developing your game towards, I don't want to say simple-minded, but that people that don't have enough time, or people that
I hate that excuse.
Don't want to actually focus on the nitty-gritty of how to become efficient in the game. They just kind of want to have a kind of a cookie cutter set out placed before them, and then they follow the cookie cutter.
And you brought up a good point where people say, I don't have time for that. And so that's one of I hate when people say that. And the reason why is because, a lot of people don't have the time. So what they do is they say, hey, this is the meta. I don't have the time to get those items, to get that best in slot list. I don't have time to attend all of these raids. to, or I don't have time to re-roll whatever is meta, whatever class is the best. So instead of just going, okay, I don't have time, I'm just going to enjoy the game. Instead of doing that, they say the developer needs to bring the meta to me then.
Mm-hmm.
The developer needs to make me either buff my class or give me all the items for free, or I'm going to riot, or I'm going to quit the game. I'm going to quit the game, and I'm going to make a post about how I'm going to quit the game on their forums. And it's like, I mean, I had one of my YouTube videos like over a year ago where people say, I don't have time because I have family, I have a job, I have X, I have whatever. And I'm like, that's fine. A lot of us have different priorities than just playing a video game. But maybe, have you considered the slight possibility that maybe this game isn't for you? Or maybe this type of end game content isn't for you? Because I think that's one of the biggest problems the meta and MMORPGs have gotten into overall, is back in the day in their old MMOs, you had to cater to the game. Now, the developers are being told, and they're actually doing it, making the game conform to the player. Which is, I hate it. I can't stand it.
Could I jump into that? Because that's
go ahead,
please. There's two
please.
really important points I want to go off that, because you raised some excellent points. Games don't owe you fun. Games don't owe the player fun. Reward is what's called inversely proportional to the difficulty to achieve it. That basically means the harder something is to do, the better you'll feel when you finally do it. It's why Dark Souls is my favourite game. It was difficult as hell to complete. I completed it. I felt good about myself. So when these players are watching and saying, I want to do that, if we gave that player end game gear, first of all, that's no longer end game gear because they've got it at the start of the game now. It's just gear. It just changes into stuff they've got. Guild Wars 2 does it with PvP. When you go to the Guild Wars 2 PvP section, it levels everyone up to maximum, gives everyone best PvP in-slot gear, and allows you to choose whatever you want. So you can jump straight into it. People saying, I haven't got the time. Well, your feeling of reward, your feeling of, completion is... It needs the time. It's the reward for putting the time in. You put the time in, you achieve, you get this feeling back. I used to teach martial arts. I taught martial arts for about 5 years. If someone came to me, hey, I haven't got the time to get a black belt, can I have one? Well, no. Because it's not about you wanting something that you like. It's about earning something that you currently haven't got. And people don't like the idea that video games, which are meant to be fun, demand something of them. They are puzzles, they are tasks, they are challenges, and if you complete the challenges and tasks and puzzles, even if that puzzle is just time, because if you're training a skill in game, it's not necessarily difficult, it's just a time investment. And when someone achieves it, you can see their reward is you put the time in, you got the thing back. You aren't owed fun by a game. You can eventually earn it if you put the time in. Final Fantasy XIV has the main story quest. If people say, hey, I want to just get straight to the end, well, no. Just play the main story quest. That's what the game literally is. So you aren't owed fun by it. But then, if people want to go straight to the end game, why does the early game suck so much that they don't want to do it?
Right.
That's a good question.
Why is the early game so bad that people's first opinion is, I don't want to go through the game, I want to be there? If there is the fun of it, what is the point of everything before there?
I think
the tutorial.
Exactly. I think it is. That's the tutorial. It's a 70-hour tutorial, and then the game begins.
I think where this problem gets especially compounded, is the fact that the older an MMO gets, the longer it's been on the market, the more expansions it gets, and then eventually, it's been so long. I mean, EverQuest has been going on now almost 20 years,
and its last expansion last year. The Burning Lands,
and it's still going. It's still getting expansions, and it's like, well, that's a problem I think developers run into as a game ages, especially because they're like, man, we can't make a new player go, hey, you're level 1, and you have to get to level 500 the same way everyone else did.
Yep.
And now where I disagree with them is where they go, I got an idea, let's monetize it. You can buy your way to the top. I think that's bullshit. But essentially, what a lot of people are doing is they're getting a game. It's like buying a puzzle, like you said, but the puzzle's already glued together. And it's like, why did you just buy a fucking picture?
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. I mean, and then they get their puzzle put together in the box, and then they say, this is boring. come on, give me more. This is boring.
You're absolutely correct. Well, you say to that player, well, why don't you do something difficult? And they're like, oh, no, that's not the meta. You know, you can't do something difficult because they're not being efficient. You can't do something as easy as possible and then complain when it's easy. You're literally getting what you wanted.
Right. And that boils down to the ultimate human flaw that people don't know what they want. And when they do ask when they do finally get what they think they want, they're too pig-headed to admit when they get it that they were wrong. They're like, this isn't what I wanted. Yeah. What you want is challenge and fun.
Reward.
Right. And
there's different ways of making that. So like for your example in Guild Wars 2, the main game you have to earn gear, the main game, but PvP they level everything out. The reason why they level everything out is because it should be about the competition between players.
Yeah.
So it's like Street Fighter. It would suck if I entered a Street Fighter tournament and someone was playing Ryu and I chose to play as Ryu, and because he's been playing for so much longer, for some reason his character's stats were way higher than mine.
His punches hit harder than yours.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or something that sort of ends up breaking the game. And this is why we have rules for sports, for example. Well, and I would say right now, it's why we specifically in combat sports separate females from males. You know, like we're not going to throw I'm not going to throw a female into a fight with a male. That's not going to be a thing that I'm. Get into some
dangerous territory here, man.
Exactly. I mean, I don't want people getting their heads smashed.
Yeah. There's a BuzzFeed article getting written right now, Rhomagus. You fucked all of us, man.
But yeah, so part of the rules, specifically in competitive games, is getting rid of all of the external variations to focus on the actual skill of the player. Same with NASCAR racing. You know, there's so many specifications that the cars have to adhere to, and if they go beyond those specifications, then the vehicle is disqualified.
Sure.
So it's not just about having the fastest car; it's about having the better strategy.
Sure.
Do you think that brings us into dangerous territory where MMORPGs effectively become two games? They become player versus environment and then player versus player. You cannot balance, because people often say, oh, what's the PvE like and then what's the PvP like? And it's strange that we've come to accept that this seems to be the one genre of game that has two completely different sub-games within it. People want to know what the actual MMO is like and then what the player versus player is like. And the developers have this horrible situation where they're trying to balance both. And Guild Wars 2 has at least done the brave thing where they've said, we're not going to balance both. We don't want to even try, because both of them need different things.
Right.
Playing against our enemies, our game, our bosses, you need to have played the game for a long time, have good gear, take on our challenges. But playing against other players, the challenge is not going to come from the gear, the challenge is coming entirely from the other player.
Right.
And it's very odd that PvP is accepted that the challenge is the other player. But bosses, it's accepted the challenge is the gear and the time. At what point could we make a boss that adapts to your attacks like a player would? At what point could we have a boss where if you keep using fire-based attacks on it, suddenly it will develop a fire resistance and you have to change your tactics on the fly? That is one of the only ways I can think of completely destroying the meta against PvE enemies. We need the enemies to adapt, not as quickly as a player would, but at least in the same, categories that a player would.
Right. And I'm kind of torn here because I see your point, Rhomagus, that you were talking about with the race car analogy you did, a metaphor. But the one thing that the game that did the PvP the best, in my opinion, that I played personally was Dark Age of Camelot. Because the PvE side of that game was very light. So once you got to the level cap anyway, it was very light in those terms. And then how good of gear you got in PvE would translate to an advantage in PvP, because PvP still, if you weren't using something like a trebuchet or a battering ram, if you were using your own abilities, your gear mattered very much. So at the same time, like, I see how Guild Wars 2 did it, where they said, hey, everyone starts on an equal playing field in PvP. You all have the best of everything. Skill's going to win out 100% of the time, effectively, is their idea. And then I also, though, that kills kind of motivation for a lot of PvP players because they're like, I can get better skill-wise, but the people that are gear chasers and stat chasers are going to see the PvP and go, well, I'm never going to get anything better. Yeah. So I'm not going to do it. Like while early WoW, like when Burning Crusade came out and they had the arena for the first time, PvE gear was really good in arena, but the PvP gear you got from getting wins was better for PvP. Would make you stronger and survive longer in PvP. Yeah. And so there's both sides, but I agree with you, Josh, that I think bosses need to adapt. AI needs to see what you do and learn from it. As opposed to, I mean, like a good example is I've been asked before, hey, if I was a raid boss, I'd just go kill the fucking healer. I just go kill him, and then you
put a raid boss on that attacks the healer, and then have the tanks need to taunt them much more.
Right? This boss is dumb.
Have to go in masses of armor, which reduces their mana, reduces their healing ability, but at least it's an interesting mechanic.
Right, because then otherwise you think this boss is really stupid. It's been hitting the same target. Yep. The whole fight and hasn't gotten a positive result. Yeah. Like you think this isn't working. Yeah. What else can I hit in here?
Well, and just we don't have to go deep into this. This is probably a subject in and of itself, but that could be a potential mechanic coming into the new age. I know I watched just recently, Valve had trained an AI to become basically perfect at Dota. And now professional Dota players are getting clues from this AI and how it plays, because it's got thousands and thousands and thousands of games won under its title or under its experience. This artificial intelligence, and it has thousands of games within a day. It's able to play games like thousands of times faster than a human can even think, and so all of these new and interesting strategies are coming out from these AIs. And I think it would be interesting, because there's this idea in MMOs of the unkillable boss, right? EverQuest had one, Final Fantasy 11 had one, Final Fantasy 14 doesn't have one yet. But then for some reason, the players end up either cheesing mechanics somehow and defeating the boss, or in the case of 11, they're playing for 18 hours straight and still don't.
Well, that was that dragon they had to despawn, wasn't it? Because they got it down too far. That was really interesting.
Oh yeah,
was. I know there was one in EverQuest where they kept sending a bunch of like level 1 players. Like they amassed like thousands of level 1 players, and they would just keep sending every single level 1 player at the dragon, and they would do 1 damage and then die. But that the game was not coded for that dragon to die. So they got the health down really low, and then the GMs came in and just respawned it. Yeah, it pissed the entire player base.
They did something similar in Assurance Call. They actually had the bunny from Monty Python in the game, the white rabbit. It was in the game, and it was everyone called it Pookie. And if you went, because if you killed it, all you got for killing it was a pair of white rabbit slippers that you could wear around. But the thing is this thing would, like, the most geared, skilled players in the game would just get clapped, like, over and over. It was just like in the movie, man. You'd run up there and it would jump across like super fast and just take you out. And
so it took a hand grenade that you could
get
in the game.
There actually was. But
nice.
But that Pookie would jump around, and there would just be skeletons everywhere from where people had died. And it was so fun because it was so organic. And one thing I did want to mention, because it was brought up in my Twitch chat, and I thought it was a good point. We kind of touched on it earlier with like people skipping content, paying for content to get a head start or to get ahead or get free shit. How do you guys feel that's contributed to the meta in the terms of a change comes in, a patch comes in, all of a sudden X class is bad, Y class is good, and now everybody can just pay it, a little bit of money, and bam, they can have a max level Y class now and shift instantly over a period of like 2 or 3 days what their main class is. I think that has a very negative effect. I think that if you had to level from scratch, far less people would do it.
You just
Do you
mentioned
want
the
to
word
tackle that
organic.
first, Josh?
I think you've absolutely nailed it. Knowing the meta removes organic gameplay.
Oh, absolutely.
It removes any thought needed into solving the puzzle of the game and just means you must do by the steps, by the books. I think you may have just put the final piece of my puzzle together in the word organic. So you discussed about changes, things coming up and things changing and money being paid and money being needed. Neverwinter was terrible for that. Absolutely terrible. If a new change gets brought into the game and the change requires real-world money, I mean, I'm massively against real-world trading anyway. I believe that what you do in the game should reflect what you've got in the game, and you shouldn't be able to bring in your outside wealth. If people are rich in the real world, great, you've worked hard in the real world. But this is meant to be a fantasy world, it's meant to be different, we're meant to see what people gain in this world. I don't want some rich guy coming in, buying his way to beat me because he has more money. That makes me feel bad anyway. Right. When a new change comes in and you can buy your way to the top, you can buy your way to the new meta, as it will, you have to ask for these people, clearly you enjoy victory more than you enjoy reward. Because a victory is meant to be a reward, but a victory earned through no effort will not feel like a reward. It will feel empty and it will feel hollow. And that's why these people that do this are actually some of the most vicious, vile and sad people that you'll be able to meet. Because they want the feeling of victory. They want the feeling of completeness without any of the effort. They want to be put at the top of Mount Everest via a helicopter drop. And then they suddenly stand there and think, I don't feel like I've got the experience of climbing Everest. Well, it's simply because you haven't. You've put yourself at the finish line, you've opened the final page of the book, but you haven't read it. You haven't done the race. You haven't got the experience of the game, which is what it is. But then they can just go and beat everyone else. Everyone looks at them and says, hey, I want to be that guy. I want to be that guy because he looks cool. You mentioned earlier you saw someone run past you in cool armor. I want to be that guy. How do I do it? Well, in Guild Wars 2's case, you go to the cash shop and buy it.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, in most MMOs cases, that's how it is. Not all, but most. Even on some level. Go ahead, Rhomagus.
Yeah, I was going to say, this might be where we might differ a little bit.
You son of a bitch. I'm just kidding.
For me, it's about escaping the groupthink, right? I think all of those things, as much as you might want to attach, all of these feelings of achievement to, and this is an instance where you got to think meta, right? Like there are some people where like it is their life, right? Like for us three guys here, we have jobs and lives.
Did you just assume my gender?
We do other things besides the game, but for some people, like NEETs, retired or disabled people, like it's not only their primary form of socialization, but it's their primary form of achievement hunting. And I don't necessarily want to take that away from them, but at the same time, well, and just to ratchet back a little bit, to go back to, so in terms of competitiveness and choosing when is this game for you or when is it not for you, for example, what if developers only created games for only their hardcore players, specifically people that don't have jobs, that don't have lives, and can no-life the game entirely? Like what's going to end up happening is that normal, passionate men like us three we won't be able to play the game in the first place, and you'll have this incredible niche group of retired, NEET, disabled people playing a game, and you have to have a game that has a broad enough scope, because that's part of the MMO aspect, right? It massively multiplayer. It's not just multiplayer. I mean, we could just play a game of Street Fighter 2 against each other. That's multiplayer. But all of these meta aspects, I think, are part of why we play the game in the first place. It's for these organic pieces like Raziel and you had mentioned.
Right.
And so it's really difficult. Like, I think there needs to be content, there needs to be content that you can't just have by buying it, but
Right.
there should be content where it's just skill based, like Guild Wars is PvP. And then there should be ways to getting to the top, and I'm actually not necessarily completely against people skipping to end game. So like buying potions or anything, leveling potions or leveling books. They paid for a game. I paid for a game. For me, for example, I've leveled 2 characters through to end game in Final Fantasy 14. I didn't pay. Now, normally, I would be the demographic for whom the sort of leveling potion is for. A person who's already played through the game but wants to carry another character through the game again. And I know I'm sort of like a needle in a haystack here, but I actually enjoy those lower levels. The entire game to me isn't about end game, even though I fully recognize that that's what the developers are. That's how they're corralling their populace too. So by escaping groupthink, by escaping the meta and not letting other people's opinions deter my enjoyment of the game, I play from level 1 to level 80. For example, and it sucks because with the way that I play, I wish, for example, that Dark Knight started at level 1, but instead it starts at level 30 because that's, at the time, they wanted people to just get into Dark Knight and then bring it to end game.
Right.
Same with now with Blue Mage in Final Fantasy 14. It's not even a part of the core game. It's this own separate little thing, but you level it from 1.
Right.
And every job that they introduce from this point on, it doesn't start from level 1. It starts from the cap of the last expansion.
Right.
And
I totally see your point of view, and I do agree that you are definitely probably one of the few people that enjoys doing that process over and over and over again, and that's completely fine, no judgment. But I think I agree, and I see your point of view, and I agree with a lot of the things you said about it being organic. But I think I'm in the same boat as Josh when it comes to I want these fantasy worlds. What you have in real life should be separate. The main reason, like, I view it the same as if let's say you bought a game, right, an MMO, you install it, you make your first character, and right as you log in the game for the first time, it says, oh, by the way, your character was born into a rich family, so here's 600 million gold and 40 levels. You just get it. And you're like, oh, but I didn't do anything? Okay, sweet. And then your friend goes, oh, that's cool. I'm going to buy this game too. And he buys it and logs in, and it logs in, it says, hey, you were born in a poor family. So you have malaria, and your character's probably going to die here pretty soon. Like, those are real world situations, right? That kind of shit happens here in real life because that's just how life is. But these are games, and I'm a very firm believer in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. So if you have like if you have
someone else knows what that is, yes!
Right, so like it's because this society, especially today, is obsessed with equality of outcome, and it's not realistic because yeah, you're right, Rhomagus, you bought the game, you and I bought the game, we spent the same amount of money to buy the game. Let's say we bought the same version. Now every company's releasing 30 different versions, but we buy the same version for $49.99, right? We both step in the world as level 1. From there, it's all on us. What you choose to do, what I choose to do, right? If you choose to explore every nook and cranny and you're leveling up really slow, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If I choose to just kill everything, as be meta and efficient as humanly possible and get through, right? That's my choice. But at the end of the day, let's say you hit like level 20 and you whisper me, go, hey man, I'm level 20. What level are you? And I'm like, bitch, I'm already in the last raid of the game and I've got all this stuff. Yeah. And then you say the wrong response here for you to go, that's not fair. And
right.
it's like,
and
how is that
you're
not
gonna
fair?
Hear that from me.
Right. I know I wouldn't
Right.
from you, but you will from the majority of people.
Yeah.
That's not fair. Here, let me open up my wallet. And the fact that now the developer goes, here, just open up your wallet and you can get all that guy's stuff too, instantly. And then to me, that goes, well, that really isn't fair because I had to put in the work and effort to get here. And I may have maybe I didn't have as much fun as you did getting there because I didn't take my time. And that's a penalty I face. I didn't enjoy the content as much because I raced through it. That's on me. But the fact that the company, in my opinion, the developers are abusing this. They abuse it to where they go, how can we essentially get more money from people? But then the person spends the money, they don't get the reward. They don't get that rewarding feeling because they just skipped everything. And I think companies today just don't care. They want the money and they're going to do whatever it takes. And what World of Warcraft, I can't believe I'm going to say this, what they're doing with their expansion that's coming out this year, hopefully, depending on what coronavirus decides to do. If it comes out this year, how they've handled that age-old problem of, hey, our game has a lot of expansion. This is really old now. What do? They have a level 1 through 10 starting zone for everyone experiences level 1 to 10. And then you get to choose which expansion you go from 40 to 50 in. And then the last 10 levels, 20 to 10 to 50. And then the last 10 levels are in the latest expansion, no matter what. Yeah. But if you want to experience the story of Wrath the Lich King for 40 levels, that's what you do. Burning Crusade, Vanilla, Mist Pandaria, whatever. You get to pick. And I think that'll actually encourage people to not buy level skips because they go, I can play which expansion I want and get the story and everything, which is why it boggles my mind. I'm looking for I say it called the silver lining, but it's the shit covered lining because Blizzard's got to be planning something where they're like, dude, they're going to not get as many people buying skip potions now. So it's like, well, what are they going to do to monetize it? I'm waiting for that to drop. But yeah, that's my opinion. Equality of opportunity, not outcome.
Well, for me, I think it's a developer's responsibility to sort of sequester certain things, right? So, with how I feel Final Fantasy 14 does it, you could buy a level skip to 70, or can you get a full 80? I can't remember.
You can't get current expansion max level.
Last expansion,
correct,
max level, right? All right. So, and basically what they're doing is they're saying, we got a new expansion out. We want you to be able to experience this expansion. We know that, because it's an MMO and not a single player game, it's going to take you a significant amount of time to get to that point. We still have customers that we want to serve, regular everyday subscription customers that log in every day, and there's activities for them to do, but they also want to be able to advertise to people that aren't into the game. But they also understand that because it's an MMO, it's dependent on population. If you don't have a population, the game doesn't work as intended. Mm-hmm. So in order to get more customers in, they have to be able to make that and put that as a point of sale.
Sure. So then that also begs the question: is what can they do to make the content that people want to skip, make them not want to skip it anymore because it's more ironed out.
11 tried doing that, but what ended up happening is a lot of people they would become, because what ended up happening in 11 is most of the content in that game, when they would release new content, like a new expansion, for example, they would cover multiple levels, right? So when the new Chains of Promathia expansion came out, there was level 30 content, level 40 content, level 50 content, level 60 content, and level 75 content. It was all new content to the game that was spread across the entire breadth of levels. But what pissed off players who were already playing the game, veterans, was that they were then de-leveled to all of the other stuff, right? So if they wanted to bring a new player through, they would have to have certain gear, right? This was before this was before level sync, right? So they would either have to have a level 30 character or a level 30 job to take their friends through this level 30 dungeon. It just wasn't convenient from either a veteran point of view or a new player point of view.
Well, a lot of times what you run into with those scaling mechanics, because Final Fantasy XIV has that as well, is there's very little incentive for the higher level player to want to help them because they get nothing out of it.
Right.
Which, again, if people are playing efficiently, that's not efficient.
Yeah.
It's not efficient to help your friend in the game, Rhomagus.
They
start being more self-centered, you piece of shit.
They throw in all sorts of incentives to try to get the veteran players to play with with the newer players, right? So like tomestones, incentives,
money and stuff,
or whatnot. Yeah. So like there are incentives there, but to a lot of people that are already playing in game, and it goes back to the meta. Like if to get the best gear in the game is the point of the game, then there's no point in doing that other content at all. Like there's no point in doing your dailies because you're already challenging the hardest content. What's the point? And then what's funny is even when you do get all of the gear from that content, because I did Bahamut back in the Binding Coil of Bahamut, you get all that gear. That's the end of the, like, there's nothing else to get. Right. But what's funny is because since getting the best gear was a part of defeating the best content, there really is no point in having the best gear in the first place because you were able to defeat the hardest content in lower level gear.
Right. Now,
but
I totally
that's
get
also
what you
a
mean.
way that they can sequester the veterans from the people who paid their way, right? So, for example, someone wants to buy a skip potion and go straight to level 70 rather than 80. But you're level 80 and you've tackled the hardest content and you have access to this specific gear set that you can only earn in game. Right. You can't buy it. There isn't a possible way to buy it. Right.
Well, so but then this raises another issue that I see a lot with people skipping content is they'll skip or they'll re-roll based off what's meta. They'll instantly buy whatever is the best now. Or they're a brand new player that goes, I just want to be at the end because that's where my friends are, right? And so they'll skip. And then they get into groups and you can tell immediately that they bought that character because they are horrible. Like if they're on their tank, all of a sudden you're like, dude, where's the aggro? Why can't you hold aggro? And like you saw it live on one of my streams when I was doing the end game content. I think it was E3S, and the healer didn't even have. I kept dying to this ability, Living Dead. Yeah, I kept dying to this ability, and I'm like, dude, you need to cast Benediction on me when I do this, or I'll die. Like it's kind of like a Living Dead, where hey, if I don't get healed the full in 10 seconds, I'm gonna die no matter what. But I can't be killed during those 10 seconds by the boss. He's like, oh, okay. And I died like 4 times. And I was like, dude, how come you're not casting Benediction on me? And he's like, it just got quiet. It just got dead quiet. And then his friend tells me he's putting it on his hotbar. The best healing spell in the game you don't even have on your hotbar? How long have you been at the max level? You get that ability like 20 levels ago.
Right.
Why didn't you have it? And it was like very clear that White Mage was meta at that point. He skipped and got there. He had no idea how to play. Yeah. And it's like
you can go on Amazon right now and buy a black belt. They cost about 15 quid.
Right.
You can then absolutely walk into a martial arts competition.
I have a black belt.
It doesn't mean you can have any of the knowledge actually behind it.
But what you can say there is, I have a black belt, not I am a black belt.
Yes, I am a black belt. I've got one. I'm there. I'm like, okay, cool, prove it. They're like, I don't know how to. It's nothing.
I totally get it because I've done quite a bit of martial arts myself, and you see people that and the Japanese martial art I'm into, like they don't really use belts, but I use belts. They use dans, and I use belts when I'm talking to other Americans because that's all they understand. And so I totally get it though, where people just want the end result. But if you just hand someone a black belt, it's not going to mean much to them.
No, it doesn't matter.
Just like me, I remember my first car I got, my brother just gave it to me, and I treated that car like shit.
You have no value to it.
I smashed the windshield. It was all dirty inside. Like I treated it more like a garbage can than an expensive car. And now, like my car now, I take pristine care of that because I paid, $15,000 for it. It means something to me.
Could we talk about the meta in relation to people who items you can't buy in the game? Because you can buy the best things, but you mentioned earlier that you can kill that Monty Python style rabbit, and you can get the slippers. And there are some people who do live in MMORPGs. There are some people who this is their main form of interaction, of socialization. I would say a lot of Korean games. So you've got Terra and you've got Black Desert Online.
Yes.
Give the ability to just buy your way to the end game.
Mm-hmm.
Money is going to help you win. What could MMOs do that would still be meta, but not necessarily meta stats, but meta prestige, meta fashion?
Well, interestingly enough,
it doesn't have to have numbers attached to it. It can just
Final
be when
Fantasy,
you see someone with that, you're
right.
like, oh my god, they've got that.
Interestingly enough, Final Fantasy XIV, I think, has done a pretty good job of this with their ultimate raids, where there's very unique weapons that you can get from if you beat. And this content's ridiculously hard. Yeah. And you get these weapons that you can't get anywhere else, and they have no stats.
I'm not stripping, don't worry. I'm not stripping, but I think I've got a strange example that I'm wearing right now. Okay, this is going to sound odd, but my girlfriend played Final Fantasy XIV, and she got the shirt that says...
Son of a bitch, is that... Oh, that's the Odin. Yeah, yep, that was from 2.0. Yeah.
So she got the I Beat Odin shirt that I'm wearing now.
And see, here's what's...
I wasn't that good. But this is an example of something that maybe you can't immediately buy that has value for that. In old school RuneScape, one of the hardest enemies in the game to kill is called the Inferno minigame. When you kill the Inferno, you get a cool cape that has like lava effects on it. But that's not the rarest cape in the game. The rarest cape is you have to kill 10 very specific enemies to get 10 incredibly rare drops to go and kill 10 champions to then wear the champion's cape. The crazy thing is the champion's cape has no stats. At all. It's totally useless. You would never wear it in a fight, ever. You'd wear the Inferno cape. But when you see someone with the champion's cape on, you're like, I can't believe they've got that. That's incredible. And
that's what they do with the ultimate weapons. They have no stats. But you can make any current weapon you're wielding, you can transmog or glamour it to look like.
Yep.
And so you can be, that guy beat X ultimate fight. And to even make it further, the ultimate fight from last expansion, if you go back and do it now, it down levels you to that. Okay. You can't you can't outgear or outlevel it later on and get the same reward.
Back to what it was.
Right. Mm-hmm. You can't go back and go, hey, now that fight will be way easy because I'm 10 levels higher than it was when it was released and I have way better gear. You can't do that. And so I think tying back in, I think something else MMOs could do to make where you can't buy your way through it. Assurance Call is the only MMO I've ever seen do this. Is the developers would actually, for the storyline of the game, which you could be involved with or you couldn't, it was up to you, you didn't have to do it, they would log in as lore characters. Their avatars would be characters in the lore, and they would talk to people and give them certain missions and items that were 100% unique if they did what they said. It would never be in the game again. So if you missed that, you missed it. You couldn't pay for it later. And one of the greatest things they did was they're like, okay, in this story, we want to progress to where this Dark Lord, Baelzeron, gets resurrected, right? And is going to just terrorize the planet. But in order for him to spawn in the world, each server has a crystal that needs to be destroyed. And this crystal has tons of health. It doesn't really do a lot of damage to you, but it has tons of health. So players would find this crystal and go, oh, there it is. Some players wanted to destroy it to, see what happens. And then other players wanted to protect it. Yeah. And so every server for about a period of, I want to say 2 or 3 months, had this all-out PvP battle for this crystal. And slowly over time, over these months, the crystal's health would get a little lower because hits would get through it, a little lower. And every server's crystal had fallen by the 3rd month, except for the server that I was on. It hadn't fallen yet. And so we were still guarding it. The developers logged in as the Shadow Lords and buffed the living piss out of all the players that wanted to destroy the crystal. And then sent them in. and they just wiped the floor with us for, because they had all these insane buffs that the NPCs gave, but not after we pushed them back 3 or 4 times. And then they finally destroyed the crystal. And then for the next month, a developer would just log in as Belzeron and terrorize towns, like drop meteors on towns and stuff and just kill everybody. And one day this little low newbie guy, like level 20 or 30, ran into him. He was just out in the wilderness standing there. I guess the dev hadn't done his destruction yet and was AFK or whatever. And goes up, he's like, oh my God, it's Belzeron. And so he says, he types an emote and says, gives Belzeron a Twinkie. And the dev turned the character to him and gave him a buff that made him like a god for an hour. And that player just ran around, just kicking everyone's ass, just going on a spree, man. And it was so cool because that was so organic. And you can't buy your way into that.
You know what I tend to find? That every example you've brought up, every example of the meta being interesting, every example of the meta being good, whether that's Magic the Gathering, whether it's the developers logging in, whether it's the idea that PvP is made balanced and fair, every single example when someone says this is a good meta has one thing in common, and that is on both sides of the puzzle, there is a human. On both sides of the puzzle, there is a person. Once the meta is human against human, it naturally adapts to itself and can never be solved, which is what makes it fun. Once you make a person or a human player fight a pre-scripted enemy, a pre-programmed enemy, it can always eventually be beaten. As soon as you make something that has a limited number of choices, no matter how complex you make the boss, I don't think bosses are anywhere near as complex as they should be, but as soon as you make an enemy in a game a limited number of choices, it will be solved and beaten. Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 have all been beaten hitless. Someone's got their way all the way through it. The Happy Hob has made his way all the way through. Incredible achievement. Imagine if he had to do it again, but every single enemy was controlled by a human player.
Right.
Almost no way you could do it.
No.
The meta can always be solved, and will always be solved, if the amount of choices on one side is limited. When you make the amount of choices unlimited, the meta actually needs skill to get through.
Because then something only stays meta for a very short period of time.
Yes.
And then once someone beats it, it evolves to the next thing, and then it keeps getting beaten. And right now, metas get solved in the first 2 or 3 days of every patch release.
They do.
Like you said earlier. And then it's their way or the highway,
Yeah.
Like, hey, in like Final Fantasy 14 is a good example. If you're not running these 2 tanks and these 4 these 2 healers and these 4 DPS, you need to get the hell out.
You said earlier that bosses don't adapt to it.
Right.
Imagine if you walked into a boss room and suddenly he poisoned everyone, and every healer was there going, ah, crap, none of us have taken any anti-poison, none of us have taken any cure poison spells because he never does this. Suddenly you sat going, well, you're healers, surely one of you should be able to do this. And they're all going, well, no, none of us did it because that's not what we expected.
And the best spec is not having a poison cure, like an antidote.
They expected it to not be there. The boss adapted to do it, and now everyone dies because of it. Poison might be weak. Poison might not be the meta. But if no one's prepared for it, suddenly it is the hardest thing in the game.
And I think
believe
that
bosses...
I was gonna say, I think that also paves what you're talking about here. Is that paves a path for artificial intelligence, like
Absolutely.
actual artificial intelligence, right? Not pre-programmed artificial intelligence, but like let's say there's a boss. Let's say there's a boss in an MMO 10 years from now, and most everyone, when they face it in the beginning of the game, is able to defeat it, but this particular boss is controlled by an artificial intelligence that's been getting beaten, quote unquote, by thousands and thousands of players for years on end. And what people don't notice about this boss is every once in a while, when they level a new character or whatever to fight the boss again, he comes back with a different strategy. Yep. And so I think it would be an interesting way to introduce like don't outright say that this boss is an AI controlled boss, but just kind of let it learn organically on its own, and to see at what point will it become mathematically unbeatable by a human.
Well, but then you've also, your game system has to support the AI, as in your classes have to be adaptable.
Yeah.
Because you can't have like where if a healer, like for example, in Final Fantasy 14, there's a shield healer and there's pure heals, right? If you have something that a shield healer simply can't do, then whoever rolled that class is kind of screwed. While you've got to have a class system that will evolve around and let you adapt to what the boss throws at you in turn as well.
What you would need on that boss is a load of graphs and behind-the-scene charts that slowly go up and down. You said, what happens when the boss becomes mathematically unbeatable? That would be great. The only way to then beat it would be to use a strategy that no one's tried, would be to send everyone in with the same attack. If you have the boss adapting to the attacks, if he's taken a lot of fire damage, his fire defense goes up. But with this going up, his ice defense possibly goes down. So you end up with this boss that is always essentially beatable, but you might not yet know how that's done. You got a load of people going, well, what haven't we tried? What is he strong against? Right. What is he winning against? How do we beat this time specifically? That's machine learning, and that'd be amazing. That would smash the meta away.
And one thing, though, that we'd have to be careful about in this situation is data mining could potentially ruin something like that. Yeah. Because in my opinion, data mining is really when things started to go meta in the wrong direction, where 4 months before a patch comes out, people have been on a PTR or people have been in beta, and people know the answer to everything before the vast majority of the player base has even touched the content.
Well, and here's the issue too, and it's not something that we touched on, but it affects it, right? We're talking about MMOs here, but Josh had mentioned Dark Souls earlier, right? And we all know sort of horror stories about Dark Souls. It's incredible difficulty, how some journalists just aren't up to the par to play Dark Souls, so they're requiring them to make Dark Souls easier. It's like we have a sort of resistance to that in MMOs because MMOs require a massive amount of people.
That's because people are babies, man.
But exactly. But like what Raziel said is like, maybe this game is not for you, right? So like, for example, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, I've seen some people take an hour to beat that Scorpion boss in the demo. But the current speedrun world record is 13 minutes and 14 seconds. And I've heard some other people, they can't even beat the boss. It's just way too complicated for them.
I've had people tell me that too, like, dude, I can't beat this boss. Really?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is like, we wouldn't have 7 Remake designed like it was if it wasn't for games like Dark Souls, right? You have this incredible, passionate player base that loves to be challenged, that wants a challenge, right? Final Fantasy VII Remake or what it's looking to become, like, the only reason it has a lot of those game mechanics in the first place is because of games like Dark Souls. But the thing about 7 Remake is that it's not an MMORPG. It doesn't have to adhere to a subscription service or a massive subscription base. Like, it can be enjoyed as the game itself, as a piece of art itself. It's not this thing that has to adapt to its player base.
And that's the thing, is so many games these days, those are games as a service, in quotes. And so, I mean, like a game I'm playing right now in my downtime, because I'm waiting for New World to come out, because I want to give that a try. I've been playing Division 2, and the game's a complete shit show right now. But its biggest problem too is that we touched on earlier, balancing PvP with PvE. It's been its biggest flaw for the first game up to this game, and it's the developers all eventually fold to the loudest people in the community. And if the loudest and most people are screaming for nerfs, screaming for free shit, a way to buy their way to the top.
Well, and it sucks when like the meta in this case can actually affect single player games, because there are developers that are like, oh no, this journalist isn't going to buy my game. I better throw this journalist a bone and change the game according to his.
The journalists all get the games for free, man.
Or Twitch streamers, like Twitch streamers that jump onto a game, and then like for some reason these Twitch streamers have, because they have such a large audience, they have access to the voice, to the ear of the developers. When so developers end up developing a game for certain Twitch characters rather than a player base. But anyways, what I wanted to bring it back to, it sucks that the meta, how it's sort of something in MMORPGs that we know that there's good aspects, bad aspects, and that we have to deal with it. Even for people that don't want to play MMOs, the meta is affecting single player games, which is where you would think that the meta shouldn't be able to sink its fangs into, like the games of yesteryear, like I said
Chrono
at the top
Trigger
of it, and all the old RPGs we used to play.
Well, even then, the Chrono Trigger had a meta, man. As I said right at the very beginning, every game, since games were a thing, have had a most efficient way to play and a most efficient way to do everything. It's just only difference now is, with the advent of internet, data mining.
We didn't know back then.
We didn't know.
Yeah.
You just played.
Yeah.
And if you got your ass kicked by a boss, you'd be like, well, okay, either I wasn't high enough level, or I didn't have the right gear or the right spells equipped or learned. And so you'd go grind that out, and then you'd go back.
Well, that's what sucks about data mining, is that you can data mine single player games now. Yeah.
You cut out there, Rhomagus.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say that, like, that's specifically the sort of insidiousness of data mining, is that you can data mine single player games now. So people aren't just data mining MMORPGs; they're data mining single player games.
And you know what? I think data mining is the biggest problem, is because in the past, companies would have closed betas for things. Open betas were pretty rare, and they'd have very strict NDAs on all these betas. And so the vast majority of people never saw the game outside of screenshots, but until the day that it was released. And now it's, you pay to be in the beta. Mm-hmm. You pay money to beta test for these people. And so the only way to avoid data mining is to not have test servers, to not have betas, to not have those open betas and things like that. And that would mean the company then has to spend money hiring people to do QA. And companies don't want to do that. It's all about spending the least amount of money to get the most amount of product.
So data mining it's always existed in every game, but not necessarily in the way that we know it now. The way we know it now is we can actually look at objective numbers on a scoreboard and say that number is higher than that number. But the way it existed in the past was you would actually have to play the game and have enough experiences to say, okay, this definitely sucks. I mean, if you play GoldenEye on the N64, it would only take you a few kills before you look at the Klob machine gun and go, I'm not using this anymore, this is bad. That was still a method of data mining, but you needed your own experience. You needed to actually get the data yourself. And
I would view that more as discovering, as opposed to just looking at a mathematical chart and going, okay, that's bad, that's bad, that's good.
That's bad, that's good.
Right.
And the main problem the internet has caused is it's allowed millions of players to combine all of their experiences and do this extremely quickly, which then invalidates every item in the game that isn't considered the best.
And everyone can read it. Everyone in the game can read it.
Everyone has access to everyone.
And everyone knows that if they don't follow it, they're going to be shit on by their peers.
No, again, I would say only to those players that chase the meta, right? Like, this is where, like, I can only put so much control into the developer's hands, because, I could tell developers all day long, hey, develop against the meta. It's like, well, then first they have to wait for the meta to occur, and then they develop against it. And that's what they do. Right? Developers are gamers themselves. They want their games to be interesting. And I think for most developers, they don't actually like seeing they don't like seeing players ruin their game for other potential players and customers. They have this concept of what they have in mind, and they put it out there for people to play. And then you have this insidious meta that is effectively stealing money from their paychecks. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, right? So Yeah. It's like, yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
So we've all kind of mentioned some stuff that we would do, some possible ways the meta could be. I mean, not removed because it will never be removed.
Sorry to interrupt. I remember what I want to say.
All right, go ahead.
It's up to the individual to pull themselves out of the meta, right? Like, I can only require a developer to do so much. What I think it would be better is to tell people how they can enjoy a game rather than telling people how they should enjoy the game.
Right. Well, and the thing is, I think when you follow meta, I don't think for the majority of people, they aren't enjoying the game anymore at that point. They're just following a script. But I mean, the meta is never really going to go away. I mean, Josh, you had some good ideas of PvE side of things, of how we could like make bosses adapt, how we could make
it's more theory at this point,
right? But still, like, so we got to start to kind of wrap up the podcast here. What thoughts do you have of, as far as like, do you think the meta will ever go away in the sense that it won't dictate most people's play experience anymore? I mean, because for that to happen, it's requiring that people first and foremost think for themselves.
Correct.
I mean, like Rhomagus pointed out, there's only so much the developer can mathematically do to try to avoid hard metas. But also, like, people are generally dumb, and they're generally going to do whatever is the path of least resistance.
You mentioned earlier that in order to defeat a certain boss in any game, it's a good idea to have a certain team composition. You need this tank, this healer, these damage dealers set out like this. That is the meta, because the puzzle they're about to go and solve, the challenge they're about to go and face, is known. It's already known, it's already established, it will not change from that. The meta is simply a response to known parameters. In order to change the meta, we need those parameters to have variation. When you go in to face a dragon, let's say there is a potential that the dragon will have lower defense but a much faster attack speed and interrupt your attacks. This means anyone swinging a big slow sword is going to have their attack constantly interrupted and do no damage. But the damage dealers with quick small daggers are going to start hitting it. Everyone's going to laugh at the quick small dagger damage dealer until they need them. And then it's important. By varying the challenge that you could potentially face within acceptable parameters. I'm not saying suddenly the dragon has the speed of a snake attacking you and massive poison damage.
Or every pull he changes.
Exactly. Right. For every time you experience this enemy, if there is variation, then your team composition, suddenly skill matters much, much more than the class, than the items. The player, the human, matters more than the vehicle, the character that they are driving. If you face a challenge and you look at the humans that you're playing with, the people in your team, and you can say, these are good, skilled players, we have variation in our team, we can deal with variation in the boss, then you will never have a meta team. You will simply have meta players.
And I'm fine with that.
Much better way of dealing with
it. Yeah, I agree. Rhomagus, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I know the problem with the meta is sometimes, and again, if you're a person who intimately knows the game, you understand, and you start playing the game how the developers wanted you to play, and if you can move your interests into that area, the game just opens up vastly. I remember playing Final Fantasy XI. The meta is to, as soon as you hit level 10, the very second you hit level 10, you walk a half hour to Volcrum Dunes, and then you shout for a party, maybe for an hour, hour and a half. You meet a bunch of other people. Now, it's a great experience, don't get me wrong. It was my first MMO experience with other players. But now, since I've played that game for about a decade now, I've realized that, one, that's actually not the most efficient way. I mean, it is in-game, but like what I had referred to before, is there are a lot of people that don't actually measure real-life game time. It actually, so what I could do, I could get more accomplished playing solo with my flag up while I'm looking for a party. So if I multitask while I'm doing while I'm setting myself up for a group in the background, then not only am I making am I stepping in the right direction, I'm still making progress,
Right.
but I'm doing it solo. And then while I'm soloing, I get a tell saying, "Oh, hey, we need a red mage or something. We're 5 for 6. You want to meet us here?" Cool. That entire time I have been making progress. What a lot of people do is they'll just sit there. "Oh, I'm level 10. Time to put my flag up," and they'll just wait. They'll go make a sandwich, or they'll watch Netflix, and they'll wait for that tell to come in, like waiting for the job or whatever. Right.
Right.
And people will do that with Party Finder mechanics in 14 as well, even though it's modern day.
The Party Finder mechanics adjust weekly almost sometimes, but then eventually the most efficient thing does become what everyone generally tends to do.
But I noticed, like for me, for example, just playing earlier today, I spent 3 hours just sitting waiting for parties to fill and then to go fight the boss. Right? I don't think that's a game the developers want you to play. They don't want you to play the game where you sit
and that's a whole other
hours.
issue of the entire issue of MMOs becoming stand-in city and queue simulator, which is a discussion for another day.
But like what I was saying, it's like if you could start to like actually dig, if a person has the forethought to dig their fangs into everything that these games have to offer, they'll find little niche experiences that'll bring them to a better sense of enlightenment than just following what other players are doing all the time.
I agree. I agree with both of you. And I think my final thoughts are, I love the whole thing you said, Josh, about I love there being a meta player, but not a meta anything else.
Yeah,
and
I
so
agree. That was a great quote.
Right. That's great. And so what I would do, and I know WoW attempted this, but they missed the mark. But let's say you go to a dungeon, right? And I want to just, on the queue note, I want to get rid of queues completely. But let's say you go to a dungeon and you have your 3 or 4, depending on how large a group size can be, friends with you, and you're all very skilled players. The games need to start giving every player the tools and giving every player the ability to shift between those tools at the start of something, obviously not mid-combat. But let's say you enter a dungeon and it's like, right, you don't know. There's no way to know, because when WoW did this, everyone knew what every modifier was for the week. Instead, the modifiers aren't chosen for this dungeon until you enter. So you enter the dungeon and it's all random, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, first pull. All right, last week we did this pull. We got frozen and poisoned. This week, these enemies are throwing fire at us and a bunch of physical attacks. So everyone right there after the first wipe, they go through their talents and their character sheet, and they start picking different spells and talents that adapt to that. And then they do the dungeon. And then let's say they get to the boss, and the boss isn't fire and physical attacks. He's ice and poison now, and then they go, okay. And then after the first pull, they can shift. But let's say they didn't find out he was poison and ice until halfway through the fight. And then the same thing can be done with raids. So that's both small content and large content. As far as PvP metas are concerned, which is, I think, harder for developers to balance, but I think you should be able to do something similar where, you get into a fight with somebody, a 1v1, and he beats your ass, and you're like, man, he hit me with all this stuff. Like, he's clearly spec'd as like a fire mage or whatever, right? Like, he's burned me up. So then you go through your sheet, fire resist, you're doing all this stuff, ice attacks, and then you see him later on in the battleground and you fuck him up. But then his friend that you would have done really well against before, now that you've spec'd for fire protection, he just starts blasting you away with ice. And it's like, so you've got to go, oh, should I go all hard fire or all hard ice? Or should I move kind of a hybrid where I'm okay against both because I know I'm facing both these guys? But at the same time, if fire's OP and you go up against a whole battleground team of all fire mages, because they're like, oh, we're going to steamroll, face roll everybody. And then you go, no, you're not. And you just do it to where you pretty much can't be killed by someone that's a fire mage. You just single-handedly wipe their whole team. They're going to have to adjust. they're going to go, oh, okay, well, some of us go poison then. Some of us go physical attacks because otherwise this guy's just going to, fuck us up all night. So I think that needs to be adaptable. And if you get into a situation where it's like, hey, man, you're just not spec'd right. Your class doesn't suck. You're just not spec'd for the situation. You should get your ass kicked. But then you should have the opportunity to then adapt and try again. And go, okay, I need to change up my style here because clearly what I'm doing isn't working. Mm-hmm. And they need to find a way to make that work. In PvE and PvP, I think they have a much harder job to do that in PvP. In PvE, it's, you can set modifiers on dungeons, on enemies, on bosses, have bosses that learn from what you do. But they also need to give you the tools to beat that. And then I think balance would even become easier that way. Yeah. Because then there's not, people going, well, we keep nerfing Pyroblast, keep nerfing it a little more every 2 weeks because it's still too strong. Its DPS numbers on log site say it's too high and everyone's using it. Instead, that may be the strongest spell in the game. But how about this? The boss just deflects it. Just throws it away this time. And then you're like, oh shit, I gotta do something different.
I think it's interesting that even though we all have different opinions and different experiences, the one thing as MMORPG players we can all agree on is that the way you defeat the meta is by variation. You bring in variation, you bring in changes, or you bring in humans.
Right.
You were talking about the mage that was spec'd as a fire mage. He chose to do that. Suddenly he's defeated. He respecs as ice. Someone comes in as fire. The more variation you can bring in, the more the meta will change every few minutes instead of every few years.
Right. And the less nerfing and pissing off their customer base the developers have to do. Because every time something that's really strong gets nerfed, all you see is just bitching on the forum. Why'd you nerf this? It was so good. It was overpowered. Ways. But something can't be overpowered if at a moment's notice, bam, suddenly it's ineffective. Yeah. But then it may be strong again, the next fight. If everything changes so much, then they don't need to nerf stuff all the time. Like, it's okay for that strong to be OP in this situation.
Yes.
What's not guaranteed is that situation's not always there.
Yes, but the problem is that the situation we're in right now, the way games are, the situations are always there, they're always known, and they will never, ever change. So OP things are OP because they match the situation we know and will always do so. Bringing variation, suddenly, you don't have that anymore.
I agree. I think we need to write a strongly worded letter and send it off to all the developers. Like, dude, you want to hire us, man? We can fix your shit game, man.
Right.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Do you guys have any other thoughts before I do the outro here?
I'm not going to say I have other thoughts, but this, we could go on for hours and hours and hours just because the concept is so big. But
it's huge.
And I'm sure that this probably isn't going to be the last time I talk about it. And it's probably going to rear its ugly head somewhere on down the line.
Until it goes away, it won't stop doing that. So, Josh, what about you, man?
I would be more than happy to sit down with you guys and hash out some other subjects. We've touched on PvP, we've touched on enemy design, we've touched on items with no stats, we've touched on pay to win, we've touched on pay to buy, we've touched on so many things that MMORPGs do all the time, and each one deserves to be its own video. So
yeah,
I think
and that's
a lot more.
That's where we're kind of going with it. We'd love to have you on the show again.
Definitely. Thank
you so much for being part. And then you showed off your lovely Odin shirt there, and so I thought I'd show off my shirt right here. So
right on.
But brilliant.
Anyways, guys, this has been R&R D&D with our special guest Josh Strife Hayes. Please, everybody, if you're unfamiliar with his channel, his information is up here on the screen. His Twitch and his YouTube channel. Please go and follow and show your support. We have a lot of sitting around at home to do during this quarantine, so why not watch some streams. I know you're continue to stream right after this, are you not, Josh?
I'll be playing old school RuneScape for the remainder of the
yeah.
4 months I've got to be at
Oh,
home.
man. I know.
Us, isn't it?
It's insanity out there. Make sure, though, you got to keep in mind, as long as you have a fortress built out of toilet paper, you're immune to the virus. It's been proven. But Rhomagus, you guys have his information there on the screen as well. Please give him a like and a follow. He streams as well. My information's up on the screen as well. I'm not, again, since I'm just slowly coming back, I'm not set on a calendar date-by-date stream schedule yet, but I do announce on my Discord and on my YouTube channel when I am streaming. So please, thanks everybody for coming by, for some of the great suggestions in Twitch chat. I really appreciate it. And as always, my friends, keep it real, and thanks for watching.
Row, row, row your boat.
Thanks again, guys.
Not a problem. Take care.
Yep.